everybody. Welcome to Celestial You.
Hello.
Laura is back for another Astrology Today. This episode centers on the eclipse. So first, we're just going to talk a little bit about, Laura's going to give us a synopsis of the effects of the eclipse as a supernatural phenomenon. And how that affects each and every soul that's incarnated. So that's going to be a really interesting discussion. And then we're going to, so excited. So hey, thanks Laura for coming again to this.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yay. Okay. And then after that, we are going to be talking up, so just the solar eclipse for October. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of the U.S. chart and also Yamakoti. So a lot to talk about today.
Definitely. Okay, so I'll just get started. I'm going to explain some of the legends and myths around what eclipses mean as far as how it connects to the other worlds or the astral plane, if you will, or and how the eclipses are kind of a portal. They create a doorway, and I'm talking about solar eclipses here, to the other realms, and how that plays into past life astrology and just the incarnation of souls with every solar eclipse, which is usually around every 6 months. Okay. Now I want to just point out too that eclipses in a person's chart, in an actual natal chart, can be really good. It can be either or, it really depends. But an eclipse on the world stage in mundane astrology usually heralds very challenging events. Okay. And so it's a little different between natal and mundane astrology talking about eclipses, because eclipses usually shake things up for the entire world. But in a person's chart, they can either be really herald very good things or more challenging things, depending on, the person's chart and what house it's in and all that kind of thing. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of say that first. Now, because when eclipses happen, when you do a Muhurta or electional astrology, they call it in Western astrology, they advise you never to do something or start something or have a significant event in your life happen 3 days before or 3 days after an eclipse, because it's an unstable time. And the reason it's an unstable time is because the lights are being swallowed, the sun or the moon, and they're part of life on Earth. They're a foundational part of life on Earth. Now, in past life astrology and dealing with people coming into incarnation, souls coming on into an incarnation, when you have a solar eclipse, apparently there's a portal that opens into the other worlds. And because of that, it can cause some instability on Earth, generally speaking. But what it means is every 6 months that these or so that solar eclipses happen, it pulls into the realm or astral realm surrounding the Earth souls who have certain karmas they need to play out in their lifetimes on Earth. So this solar eclipse before the actual birthday of a person, the last solar eclipse plays a big role in past life astrology. And it shows that what kind of theme those people in that 6 month period until the next solar eclipse are playing out, some of the themes in their life that is not shown in the regular birth chart.
Yeah.
So, and then, okay, so then what, so the eclipse happens, this portal opens, and it pulls in, it attracts people who, or, souls, I should say, who want to experience earthly life. And what they do is they kind of just hang out, for lack of a better word, in this plane around the earth until the exact placements of the planets are right and match their sanskaras, or their karmas, their parents, the environment, everything they should be born into, they enter. So when
it's like a soul in waiting, just
right, and they get more accustomed to like being on Earth, And
we've talked about it being kind of like an initialization, right?
Right.
It's like you're going from being, I imagine, going from being a soul that is, fully integrated, soul, to a human has it makes sense that it doesn't happen overnight. Let's just put it that way.
Right, exactly.
An adjustment.
Yeah, in Jaimini astrology, you can see from the birth chart, you can see what plane, what kind of astral environment or plane the person is coming from before they come into this earth and astral environment. And you can do that with the Atmakaraka, the 12th from the Atmakaraka, and certain Varga charts or certain divisional charts. And but so, that solar eclipse before I get into that, Rahu is actually a planet of falling. It rules falling. Okay, so if you fall, that it's either Rahu or the sign of Sagittarius, okay, influencing something. Now, but that actually is the remembrance of the soul falling to earth, because Rahu is involved with that. It's either the eclipse is happening with Rahu, or Rahu is exactly opposite that eclipse. So in eclipses with Ketu more have to do with perfecting certain things in this life that the soul is already accustomed to, that has been working on in past incarnations. So that's how it works. That's how, because it's really kind of interesting to see a person's past life karmas through that solar eclipse before they were born, the last one before they were born, to see what kind of immediate karmas they were working on, and to balance out and fulfill some of their past life wishes or unconscious desires. And so
it's totally not available unless you look at that previous eclipse. You won't know.
Right. And it is a big deal in past life astrology. So, and everybody born with certain eclipses, within that 6-month period, they have an affinity with the other people born around in that same period. Even though their lives may be totally different, there is a theme running. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty fun. Interesting.
It is fun. And I think you were saying something about how the moon is involved in this process. And how the moon,
so in a solar eclipse, the moon eclipses the sun. So they call it the moon is swallowing the light of the sun. One of the lights is swallowed by the moon. And the moon is very much a planet of life on Earth, because it orbits the Earth. It's the only planet that orbits the Earth, and it rules our senses. The moon is indicative of us experiencing elements and the world and what they call the tattvas, the senses. We have senses of experiencing things, And then everything in the world is made of the 5 tattvas, or the 5 essences, elements, basically the astral elements. So the moon is very much a planet of, pulling in what our habits, our likes and dislikes, how we feel, who we are, which is very much a moon thing. So, so the sun is more of our essence. It's the essence of who we are. It's like our connection to our higher self. But the moon is how we interact with the world, and see, the sun would be our essence after we pass on. We still have that primordial essence, but who we are as a person.
Perhaps before we come in is the essence of what we start out with.
Yeah.
Until the moon like imbues all the jiva, right?
Right. The jiva, the idea of separate existence and incarnation.
Yeah.
And interacting with the world. So that moon sign, our moon's nakshatra, the divisional chart placement of our moon is so important.
Yeah.
It's, you just really see a lot about the person from their moon
and their identity. So this is, I mean, the way that I am seeing this is a time period where you're initiated into your like individual role.
Yes,
And
definitely.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So when people, it makes sense. Like it makes sense too. And I was thinking as you were speaking that we start out as a soul that's, fully integrated soul with all of our essence intact. And then we get thrown into, this moon, which is basically, here's your separately who you are and how you have to relate. And when you're a child, you are very much in that moon phase initially, where you're so dependent on everybody else when you're a baby and things like that. And then it just seems like as you go further in life, you tend to back away from that moon identity, back into the sun identity as you exit. So it's like you start with the sun, you go into the moon because you become more of an individual, you become intermeshed with the people around you, and solving those interdependency issues and working through all of that. And then again, it seems like you return back to your soul.
That's exactly true. That's very true. Yeah, the moon is how we adapt to the world.
Yeah.
And what we feel comfortable with. But obviously, a lot of people are in situations that they don't feel comfortable. So that is kind of like where you see an affliction to the moon.
Yeah.
But then as you get older, usually people build up a certain foundation that where they don't have to adapt so much. They can just do what they want, and that's why that sun period starts at age 50, because age 50 is where, usually we have enough money, we don't have to struggle, or, usually, not always.
Not as much,
Right. Yeah. So.
That's so interesting. And if people are watching this and they are looking at their own astrology, so with the eclipses in particular, they would want to look at planets conjoined the eclipse. And
planets,
also in the birth chart, planets are conjoined the eclipse. Do you also look at whether or not their Atmakarkas involved, or their Lagna lords are involved for the?
Well, what I do is when I look at the eclipse chart before they were born, I cast a chart for their birthplace. I use their birthplace for the solar eclipse before their birth, the last solar eclipse. So I just look at that chart as a regular chart. I don't even compare it to their birth chart, really.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I just look at that chart and I look at where the house placement of the eclipse, any aspecting planets, of course, and then I'll look at the divisions that eclipse falls in, like the Dracana division, the Navamsha division.
And this is before, like, so on the previous eclipse to when they were born, this is before they even really inherit that Atmakarka or Lagna Lord, right? So it's like, so you're looking at it in a silo before they've inherited all of that.
Right. I'm looking at that completely separate from their birth chart and all indications, because the birth chart's going to show everything. It's going to show past life karmas, ancestral karmas, all even, how the person uses their free will, how they use their skills, how they adapt to things. So it shows a lot more than just past life karmas. And that's what that previous solar eclipse will show, a lot of basically just a bare bones of past life themes coming in.
Okay.
And certain types of themes coming in. So if you want to do this at home, that's how you would do it. You would just take your birthplace and cast the chart for the birthplace for that exact eclipse. So when the sun and moon are exact in degrees and minutes and seconds.
Yeah. And then as we're kind of talking about the effects of this eclipse, this solar eclipse, in Scorpio, folks can look at their own birth charts just to see if there are any planets within 3 degrees of that eclipse, or if it is affecting their Atmakarka or Lagna, or what house it's in.
Yeah, that's a very good point. If you're looking at this eclipse in your chart, the house placement it falls in is important. Yes, it's definitely important. However, it's also really important if that eclipse isn't within 3 degrees of any other planet and any other sign. So like, this eclipse is happening at 2 degrees of Scorpio. Let's say you have a planet at 3 degrees of Gemini. I'll use that example. That planet will be affected, even though it's a quincux, I think, in the Western, I can't remember the exact.
It's like a more remote aspect. Yeah.
Right. It's a very remote aspect, but it's still going to affect a planet in that 3 degree orb. And depending on what planet it is, that those indications of that planet will become very prominent for the next 6 months.
Okay.
So
it's basically they're going to be looking at obviously planets that are within the sign of the eclipse may be affected. Increasingly, those that are within 3 degrees of it.
Right. The closer they are, the more you're going to feel it.
Yeah.
If it's in the same sign. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, planets directly opposite that. Have you seen that as well?
Yes.
Yeah. And then like you were saying too, just that degree, every sign is affected if you have a planet within that. And to the extent that that planet is prominent for you, like, is it an identity factor for you or whatever?
Yeah, if it's an identity factor, it'll be even more intense. You'll feel that eclipse even more, but it'll affect all that planet's significations. Like if it was Mercury, your friends, your business, your recreational activities, traveling, all Mercury types things. So
yeah.
There's a whole science around. You can just have a complete system of astrology based on eclipses and lunations and full moons. Alone. Yeah. You can just make complete predictions off of that. So I'm kind of working on that right now.
I like it. No, I like it. I'm glad we're giving this overview for people to follow along. Okay, so I think next we can jump into the U.S. chart and going over the solar eclipse, the U.S. chart, and we're going to be talking about, we'll have Laura talk a little bit more about the political events, and I'll sort of bring it into like the more personal events or the inner astrology.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
we can start there.
This eclipse happens at 2 degrees of Scorpio. And with Venus, Venus is also very joined very tightly. And then the rising for the USA, all you do is take the Washington, D.C. and cast the chart for Washington, D.C. and for the time of the eclipse. And that chart has basically 23 degrees of Libra rising and is exactly conjoined Mercury. Mercury is in the ascendant. So this eclipse happens in the second house of the USA chart with Venus. So the second house has to do with, of course, money and wealth. And it has to do with food. It has to, and especially because Venus is there, because Venus is the planet that rules food too. So, so the second house and Venus together points to something happening with our food supply, the food chain, just getting food. It can be that food becomes spoiled or something of that nature, but that's a big theme. And that's for coming up to now and then also for the next 6 months, but really close, a month or two after the eclipse, usually the effects are more intense. And but the second house is also wealth and money. However, and it's being aspected by Saturn. Okay.
Wait,
so
do you find that with eclipses in like politics or these kind of more outer effects, you see a lot of the effects happening a couple months after the eclipse, like coming to fruition? Or
yes, I do. For me, the eclipses happen, and the more intense events in the world usually start a month before, a month after, or sometimes 2 months after. But they will continue up until the next eclipse.
Yeah.
And even you can do it with new moons too. After that initial eclipse, all the new moons will carry on a theme of that eclipse, depending on where they are as well. So yeah, I do. And I do this both for mundane and natal astrology. So
okay, great.
Yeah. So, and then, okay, well, there's an aspect from Saturn onto this eclipse. And in this second house. So in the sign of Scorpio itself has to do with a lack. So I think there is going to be some lack in the food supply or something like that. Also a decrease, there have been some wild fluctuations now in the stock market, but I just don't see anything drastic like a crash. I still don't see that. I just see things continue to become more expensive and things cost a lot more. They're just things that we took for granted before are becoming a lot more valuable, like energy and food, of course. And it's just that there's a scarcity there, okay, because of that aspect of Saturn onto this eclipse and it being in Scorpio. Then I just want to point out something too that I see very strongly is, so Mercury's right on the ascendant. That's pretty significant. It's within a degree. So it's at 2219 Libra, and the ascendant for the US is 2318 of Libra. And Mercury has to do with borders. Okay, so I see a border crisis or new borders forming, like, people can declare a new state or something like that, or we incorporate our border expands, like, Puerto Rico becomes a state or something like that. So that's a big, I actually see it expanding because there's there's an aspect of Jupiter too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I see, borders changing too within the United States.
Yeah.
One of those reasons is because on the fourth cusps, now when you do mundane astrology, cusps become very important because they are exact points and they're completely different for every country. So they move a lot more quickly than planets. So it's interesting to look at these cusps. And the fourth cusp is the people, the land, the public, if you will, everybody that lives in that area of a country. So you have Pluto exactly on the fourth cusp. So the fourth cusp is 2654 and Pluto is at 2610. So it's right on that fourth cusp with a direct aspect from Mars, an eighth house aspect from Mars. This shows me a lot of public unrest. Just a lot. Up in, from now until, 6 months or so. And
I really feel like
violence.
it's about either violence and also people like not feeling like they're getting their fair share, really, because this is
right. It's a Mercury. House. It has a Mercury theme, and that's exactly what that is. Yep.
Yeah.
But that eighth house aspect onto Pluto and the fourth cusp for Mars, it shows civil unrest and violence, an uprising. So that's what I'm predicting.
And I think from an inner perspective, it's similar. I see it because it's such a Venusian eclipse and it's like right there with Venus and and also Mercury. But I feel like it's more because it's Scorpio. I feel like it's people really sort of recognizing their issues surrounding money within their relationships and having this lack mentality brought to the surface because, as we've had all these issues with inflation and we've had all these issues with the destabilization of currencies and just kind of like not a full-blown recession, but a retraction of the economy. And I think in this, for personally, for people in their relationships, they are sort of questioning whether there are inherent biases. And with it being in Scorpio, it's kind of trying to get underneath all of that and understand like what are their emotional needs, right, for resources. And that's because it's a Libra rising chart. Like I really know what this is all about because I'm a Libra rising, but there's a tie between our emotional needs, our food, right? Because you had mentioned food shortages and things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And people really having to be like, well, I suffering the emotional lack of not being able to buy the more expensive items that they used to be able to and being more pragmatic about it because, again, because Saturn is still aspecting this, it's still going to continue to be a struggle in that sense. So
it's going to show people what they don't need.
Yeah.
They can get rid of what they don't need, extraneous things.
Yeah.
Another thing about this too is water. there can be water shortages because Venus is the water element.
Yeah.
You know, all five planets, and the second house is food and drink too. It's drink. So
And
that's
just
already
being
happening in a way too. So
and also being in Scorpio, potentially like
mhm.
toxicities with that, like clean water. I don't know. I'm seeing
Well, I
maybe
know, see, I live in Colorado on the
uh-huh.
Continental Divide, and that's where they sometimes they'll move water from the west to the east. That's usually what they do because of the farms from the Colorado River. But now they're not doing that because the west has a bad drought, especially the southwest, Arizona and Nevada.
California.
Yeah,
California still takes from the Colorado River as well. And I
yeah,
do
it
see
does.
us having in California
Mhm.
having issues with that. So it's water scarcity essentially.
Yes, water scarcity. Definitely.
And water is just a metaphor for our emotional our emotions.
Very true.
So
Very
it's like
true.
I feel like people are having to trade their emotional well-being for financial well-being, or at least like in, trying to balance that in some ways. See where they can give up financially and what they absolutely can't give up. Um,
Right.
I do see it being like that. And I do see in a good way, I do see this bringing out our psychological dysfunctions within um, our relationships for people to verbalize because again, um, Mercury's right on the ascendant there. So
Yeah.
the start of conversations of reframing what we value, differentiating between what's most important in our partnerships and what are our actual needs. And it's a very physical, emotional, needs based eclipse.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Just um Scorpio is going to do that no matter what. But
Yeah. But I think
um
with Saturn being involved, it does give us a little bit more perspective. Like we can get rid of, like you were saying, we can get rid of some of the frills and things that we've had
yeah,
past them, maybe even the luxuries that we've
luxuries, Venus's luxuries. So
yeah.
yeah.
So
uh
Saturn's just like, like get rid of that. You don't need that. Is that absolutely
right.
necessary? What do you value?
Exactly. The what you value is really going to become prominent. What is the most important?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the values can change too. So um
Yeah. And it's like, it's almost this like debate within us. Like, I want clean water. Of course, spring water is better than filtered water, but spring water that's bottled far away and driven and takes a lot of fossil fuels. And so there's like this idea of being more pragmatic about what we do and how we obtain our water and our resources, buying more locally even, or giving up some of that. Okay, well, do I really need French cheese? Like, it's like that kind of, I feel like that those kinds of discussions.
yeah, absolutely. That is very, very true. Um I think I want to say that Saturn actually sits in the fifth house of this chart for the United States. And the fifth house is our legacy, or it's a house of spiritual practices. It's a house of creative intelligence and identity. It's a big identity house, a big self-expression. If you want to know, if a lot of like who you see people being or who you know them as has a lot to do with their fifth house. And because that's their self-expression. So in the United States, Saturn sits in the house of self-expression, which is lack. Saturn is getting rid of things.
Mhm.
And if we don't get rid of it, we get sick. We become, it's important that Saturn has to do his function, his job. And because, otherwise it creates
You might-
sickness, which is also
you
ruled by
might find-
Saturn.
Yes, and you might find yourself having conversations with people that are way different. I mean, we're not talking about going to the movies and like eating French cheese and going on lavish vacations anymore. We're actually talking about, okay, if I'm going to express myself, I'm going to do so from a place of like really bare bones truth rather than all this, fripperies that we are used to kind of shrouding our relationships. So this kind of throws in a bit of a truth bomb in there in terms of pragmatizing the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And stripping it down. I feel like this is like the stripping down of our relationships. And some people will not survive in their relationships here. They may decide once they've stripped down everything that it's not worth it.
Right.
Discerning time for our relationships.
That's very true. There can be separations in relationships, and those separations are good. They will be good for the relationship.
Yeah.
If it survives, it means the separation will be, give a beneficial outcome.
And I do see too, like people who are dating right now. I've heard a lot of folks that are in dating. It's actually a difficult time for dating because I feel like Saturn will be pulling us back from that, slowing it down. And of course, Mars being in Gemini for so long, this 6-month Mars in Gemini, it just makes
crazy.
Anti-committal. It's crazy. So those people who are single and dating, it's not a huge, I don't see this being, I see it as a time you could come out of a relationship, maybe go into one potentially, but it's also such a non-committal time that I think it's going to be actually kind of slow going for these people. To renegotiate how they want to be in relationships is going to be a slow going kind of endeavor.
Yeah, very much so.
It's not that romantic, basically. It's like, this just doesn't work for me for practical reasons right now, or, and maybe it's just a time where people are kind of like coming out of things or experimenting with things, but not necessarily reinitiating their agreements. They do make an agreement to be in a relationship. It would have to be highly pragmatic and not as romantic and overblown, I would say.
Yeah, it would be out of necessity.
Yeah. Like people just being like, well, we should move in together because we can't afford this anymore to live apart, for example.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Interesting, right?
Yeah, very.
Cool. All right. Should we look at the Yamakoti chart? Or
yeah, I'll bring that up
about this.
So for the Yamakoti, this is the world chart, basically for this eclipse. It's the world chart, and you have Cancer rising, and this eclipse happens in the 5th house in Scorpio, and then you have a really strong aspect to you have Pluto on the 8th house cusp and a strong aspect by Mars to the 8th house cusp. And this has already kind of happened already. Because Mars occupies the 12th house, and the 12th house, of course, hides things. And it shows that there was an explosion or, some type of sabotage that was hidden. And that already happened in a world event with that Nord Stream pipeline. But the eighth house, of course, is war and battles, and it just seems like that this will escalate. The war going on right now will start to either bring other countries in or really affect them. And then that eclipse happening in the fifth house. So the fifth house, of course, is what is being expressed in the world? What is the creativity coming from, the world events right now? And what is the world creating? Okay. And that we're having it's got a really tight conjunction with Venus, which is women. Also food, and trade. Venus is also trade. But again, because of that aspect by Saturn, all of those things are going to be lacking. And certain values are being gotten rid of because Venus is values. And it's in the fifth house of Dharma or purpose. So, you were bringing up, I know we'll talk about this later, but what's happening in Iran, some of the Dharma around that country regarding women and values is changing. And some of the things are being gotten rid of or being released around how countries want to express themselves in regards to their trade, the feminine side of these countries, and what they value. So that actually, to me, is a good thing. There's a lot of good things in this Yamakoti chart because of the Rashi aspect of Jupiter onto that eclipse. And being in the fifth house can be a good house, a lucky house, and something where you're kind of opening up your horizons. You're speculating how to become more of what you want to express or what you want to be. So, and it's also the house of spiritual practices. So there can be a change in that.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, and I saw along those lines too, the potential for the start of women-owned businesses out of this. Long term, I mean, Saturn's not going to give it away easily, but it just seems like there's like the seeds being planted for that.
Then another thing about the fifth house too is it's fall from royalty. That's what Parashara says. It basically means that changing of leaders, or leaders die, there's a coup, or they give up power, something like that. That also shows quite strongly. That's already happened, but will continue to happen. There is a change of leaders losing power because of the fifth house. And, the eclipse being in the fifth house, and the sun and the moon are the king and the queen in the planetary scheme. So the sun especially is the ruler. And being in the fifth house, it shows, a lot of changeover.
Because Mars is in the 12th too. So it's like the end of some
worship. Yeah. Yeah. And the Mars being in the 12th, to me, is like sinister or kind of covert military operations.
Oh, so maybe like coup d'etats.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And then you have Jupiter
Mhm.
in the 10th. So Jupiter usually expands our horizons with something. It gives a lot of opportunities. And when some of these leaders lose their power or there's a changeover, they're open up will open up a power vacuum for a lot of good opportunities, actually, for better leaders or leaders that are either more educated or they can be connected to a higher creative vision.
Right.
Having Jupiter retrograde in the 10th, which is, retrograde planets get strong. So that is a positive aspect of this.
Yeah. And because Mars is in Gemini too, I kind of feel like those leaders would be more factual, open-minded type leaders
Mhm.
and maybe less prone to, I don't know, like maybe just a fairer approach, more intellectual approach, rather
Definitely.
than whatever was happening before.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's so many different types of societies, and how you interpret that really depends on their individual charts with the eclipse. But in generally speaking, what is new, what comes out of these leaders, they'll try to be more positive to their populations. So whatever that may be,
Yeah.
but there is a changeover in leadership in some fashion. You can even have leaders who decide they want to go in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, so that's what it really shows on that world stage.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did look at it. I did look at it a little bit through the lens of Iran because I'm Iranian or
Mhm.
Persian. And
Mhm.
so I was thinking about this from that perspective and the fact that it is in the fifth house and Venus with this eclipse really to me signifies a change in the way that women express themselves in the world and potentially a shift of power. This is also in the house of intelligence, and I really think there's going to be a new value for emotional intelligence with this Masa
Yeah.
Amini, how she was shot and killed in Tehran, and how that started protests. It really seems like because it's Scorpio, this is always going to be sort of a painful emergence, but I think that it's women really looking at the roles they have in society and the roles they have in their relationships and regaining their power and really literally unhiding what was hidden. So taking off their headscarves and
Mhm.
exposing, which is a very scorpionic um, manifestation of Venus and Scorpio. Um,
Mhm.
for the Persian women, that's this all the fuel and the fire is going to continue to come out of the protests that are happening in Iran because of this eclipse.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see it. I mean, how long ago did this happen? Like a week, 2 weeks ago, or
The
so that.
the shooting was in September and it's just been
Oh,
weeks now.
oh, okay. Yeah, I mean that we already see that happening. Yeah. So.
Mhm. And it's basically this to me solidifies and says that this is a deliberate change that's occurring on the heels of that violence.
Mhm.
That I think because of this eclipse will persist in some ways. Um, And it's about, because the original structures of women in Iran or women in ancient Persia were far more equal in the household and equal in society. And so we come from a culture, an ancient culture, where women were more revered and more respected and more equal. And because of the modern Islamic Republic, we've, taken steps back. And now it seems like with this emergence that there is, on a world stage, looking at the roles that women play, and the role that emotional intelligence, being Scorpio in the fifth house, plays within our agreements, and whether we're comfortable with the power dynamics. So maybe shifting of power dynamics to more of a emotional feminine intelligence, and how do we value that in society as well. So
Yeah.
I definitely see that at play.
Yeah, that's exciting. I really am excited to see what comes out of this in
Yeah.
Iran.
This is a Cancer rising chart, so I do think that this is an emotional movement and time for women to potentially look at the toxicities within their relationships, and people in general looking at the toxicities within their relationships and their relationship dynamics. And that may result in like Pluto in the eighth, on the eighth cusp here, may result in changes again to relationships.
Huge
Shifts, like,
changes.
potentially people for the first time recognizing their codependencies and recognizing their what they really want out of, and how does this relationship support my identity? Because again, Saturn is aspecting, but Saturn is almost is squaring Uranus, which is opposite this whole thing. And I think that there is this underlying theme here with the fifth house and Uranus being sort of on the other side. It's basically, to me, saying like we're looking at our identity within our relationships and see how that needs to shift. And if that means that we need to express ourselves differently, and a lot of things too, I feel like people are going to have across the world more raw emotional conversations about how they really feel, and that's going to shift the relationship dynamic. And it's also at odds potentially with society, because again, Saturn is still in Aquarius. We're still looking at how we fit in society and how our relationships, does society meet our idea of how we want to express ourselves and how our roles are within society.
Saturn will stay in Aquarius until it's around March, mid-March, I think it is, of next year. So another 6 months or so. Saturn is hitting a lot of stuff in my chart. So
Yes.
But in this world chart, Saturn is in the ninth house, which is our purpose. What's our purpose? It's in the world chart. And what is also that it's the house of religion.
Yeah.
So a lot of religions will be let go of, or a lot of aspects of those religions will be expelled, because Saturn is garbage. Saturn rules poop. If you don't get rid of it, you're going to get sick. It's funny too, because really, in natal charts, if Saturn is really afflicted, you have people who are hoarders, who never get rid of anything. And then they, you invite all these diseases and filth, and, it just, Saturn is so essential.
And I feel like the combination of Saturn aspecting this eclipse and it being in Scorpio really helps to level set and be more factual about, yes, we're having emotional conversations about what we need relative to our roles in society and our relationships, but they're actually more pragmatic in the sense that we're starting to unearth the real truth and get to the heart of the matter. I really see people breaking up or potentially getting just a lot of shifts in relationships.
Yeah, there will be definitely.
I also potentially see, because this is such a it's a fifth house eclipse. I was thinking potentially with Venus there, this being in Scorpio, there could be sort of an element of being a fertile landscape for new inventions or scientific discoveries that are unearthed, maybe go against what we previously knew in a lot of ways. And so I saw that kind of coming out.
That's very true. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So
that was kind of exciting to see that, because we really do want to see some shifts in the way we our intelligence, really, our human intelligence. And I feel like Scorpio can bring that.
Oh yeah. Scorpio's that sign of fixing yourself. It's going within and understanding yourself, trying to face your issues, and then repairing those issues, facing them and trying to come to terms with them.
And so even
transformative sign.
Right.
So,
and even if you don't end up in breaking up out of a relationship, you're going to have some more raw, unfiltered conversations. And with Venus being there, potentially you can heal some of these older wounds that are in Scorpio regarding, like, again, like how you express yourself, if you're feeling supported in being your true self in that relationship. So it gets really raw.
It certainly does.
Yeah. So that's how I see this solar eclipse.
Yeah, it's great. Very insightful.
Yeah. And I think maybe next time we can chat more about Iran. I'm going to be looking a little bit more into the chart to give people perspective, because I've had so many people ask me about.
I love studying ancient Persia. I love ancient cultures anyway, but it's really fascinating, and Zoroastrianism, all of that, and it was just, they had such a advanced culture, and some of those religious practices that, the Zoroastrianism was just fascinating to me, really was. I knew a lot about it years ago. I kind of forgot it now, but I want to go dive back into it.
And it feels like, as a person who, like grew up in this culture, a lot of the Persians I know identify with the older aspects of our ancient culture, where women were very much at the forefront of the family. They still are, but they're behind the scenes now. So I really wonder if this movement is exposing the truth of women in Iran, and that they really aren't these, meek, docile women that are going to be able to be subdued forever. No. And they really are just as intelligent and capable. And so I wonder if I really like this new, this eclipse for that reason, because I think it starts the conversation of, like, who are they really? Who are these women, and what are they capable of? So hopefully, really across the world too, I'm hoping that initiates conversations, especially with inflation and economic instability. This is a really good time for women to rise up and potentially start women-owned businesses, these kinds of things. That's exciting. With
definitely.
Yamakoti being in the fifth, like that eclipse in the fifth. So I don't know. Maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but I see this as a real opportunity in that way.
I do too. Absolutely. Even though, you know, there's a lot of challenging things happening in the world right now, I still believe we are in an ascending cycle. So, you know, just the sharing of knowledge, and you can't hide it anymore. You can't keep people down anymore, because they want to know, they want knowledge, and they want to be able to fully express themselves.
Yeah. And I see this as like the leg up that women and femininity and emotional intelligence needs to sort of pivot towards this direction of legitimizing this type of intelligence within our societies, whether that is, you know, a man or a woman that brings that. It's like it's highlighting how important that is. It's foundational to making society kind of like function. So I don't know. I'm really excited that this has come along at this time to challenge people, but to also help them grow and unearth more potential.
Yeah, I'm excited for it too. Even though in the outward world there may be some challenges, that's the perfect time to do that. So
yeah, exactly. Cool. Well,
yeah.
Thanks for joining me. So next
No, thank you for having me. Oh, you want to do the lunar eclipse?
We could.
Oh,
And
that would be
Iran, we'll talk a little bit about Iran, because I'll do some research on that. And then I don't know.
That'll be a lot of fun. I love talking. I talk about some of the history of Iran. I love that.
Well, I'm not like the best about the history of Iran, but I can.
Oh, really?
I know that in the time of like Persepolis and the ancient Persians, the women were like right alongside men in society.
Yeah. I mean, it was way more open than it is now. And that's not even, you know, Islam didn't originate in Persia. So
no, like you said, it's like Zoroastrianism and more of a pagan religion, but it wasn't. The Zoroastrian religion was very like basic, and tenets of it was almost a little bit like Judaism, like, you know, don't steal and don't, you know, covet his wife, and
lots of rules.
just like a set of rules. That's what it was. And so, but they also had like fire purification rituals, which we still do. It's very cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a rich culture, and I feel like I was raised with both Islam and Zoroastrianism. But
interesting.
yeah, I wasn't really raised in Islam, but I think I was raised with some Islamic values in terms of the conservatism of it. But then the Zoroastrian is far less conservative.
Really?
It's really interesting. Thanks for joining us this time. Thank you so much, Laura. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
More to come.
Okay, great. Till next time.
Till next time, everybody. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, do all that.